about the idea of revolution because it's one that is particularly prevalent today, but goes back. If you look at someone like Alvin Toffler, who has this theory of waves of society, he says, look, there are three great revolutions. There's the agrarian revolution, there's the industrial revolution, and the post-industrial society, which is us now. And the idea in many ways in these, and why they're attractive ways to argue, is they just create an enormous rupture. So you can almost say there's nothing that these people can tell us, because our world is so different. It makes it very convenient for doing history. You just say, oh, I'm just going to cut off, and everything before is irrelevant and dull, and we don't have to pay attention to it. So there's a grand sense there, look, these changes are transformative and we don't go back. What, though, is the image behind revolution? We all know the term, we all think of the phrase, what's the image behind it? Yes? A turning, an overturning, right. So it's something revolving. But while that's absolutely true, what tends to be true of things that revolve that we don't associate with revolution in general? They're cyclical, that they come back up again. That it's a kind of sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down story. And old stories of the wheel of fortune were exactly that. That great men, great women would fall, at their time would come back and they would come back up again. So there are notions of revolution in the past, historically, when people talk about it, which are not linear, we're going to go from one stage to another, but just that things will go round and round, and one day you're up and one day you're down. That seems to be an old historical notion, but in fact it's still very prevalent today in one area of thought. Where do we get this? There's a real longing, in fact, and at the moment a real worry. Yes? Yeah, we get it in the economy. Boy, do we hope things are cyclical here. And people sit around and look and start to say, because for 4 years they said, of course, when the recession is over, X and Y will happen. After the downturn, and now they're starting to question that after the downturn, is that an automatic process? Or are we in some... So we bet an awful lot of money, quite literally, on some aspects of society being utterly cyclical and coming back again. And we'll worry a great deal if they don't. I don't wish to spend the whole course talking about English history, but there are parts of it that antedate US history that I think in some ways are important. One way where you actually start to see the change in different ways of thinking about it. The English Revolution, which more or less begins in the 1640s with the attack on the assault on the monarchy, the end of the 1640s, the king's head is cut off. There you go, there's revolution. 1660, they bring another king back in again. 1688, they throw him out and bring another king back in. So things were starting, they had still, despite major revolutions, the sense that this was sort of cyclical, things went back and forth. But John Evelyn, who's a wonderful writer and diarist, you start to get this sense when you see the word revolution being used politically that things are really changing. The Popists in office lay down their commissions and fly. It looks like a revolution. And there's someone becoming self-consciously aware of society changing. So we have an idea of revolution that we throw about. One question, though, is, and indeed in this country, we have a particularly strong sense of that revolution being deeply, deeply significant in making this country. We've cut off, finally, from those old wretched despots like me, and you became a different place. So we have that idea of revolution, but when you throw in that idea of revolution, because we know it's a convenient term to describe change, again, do we always have the same idea in mind when we start to talk about it? Because if we look at a bunch of, perhaps, revolutions, well, there's the English Revolution, which most people over here actually don't even know about. There's the American Revolution, a great moment, but then there's a real pause about the French Revolution. And you see all the people like Edmund Burke, who wildly supported the American Revolution, say this French Revolution is dreadful. And even now people tend to think of guillotines and people's heads being cut off rather than the rights of man and the like. The Haitian Revolution, the Americans loved their revolution, but they got a little edgy when slaves rebelled in Haiti. That wasn't quite what they had in mind when they were propagating the idea of revolution around. The Russian Revolution, again, we don't embrace, we love the idea of revolution if it's ours, but not if it's theirs, perhaps. The Iranian Revolution, a particularly interesting one to try to understand as we look at its consequences 30 years later or so. And the question of whether we actually do get to call the Arab Spring a revolution or not. There's all sorts of different ideas on what is it we call revolutions. Usually we like to reserve them here for things that we approve of. And when we're a little unsure, we don't throw the term around. So we think of them as these great moments in society when something really dramatic changes and we can look back and say, wow, there's the break. Now we can start talking about before and after. Now, there's a fair bunch of them which you don't always think about, but it ain't anything like a real bunch. But this up just is a favorite sort of look at what a history book can look like. Here you get the first sentence, and it gets a footnote at the end of the sentence, and then the sentence takes up about the next 3 pages. And what that footnote is doing is actually saying, well, he's talking about revolution. Well, let's try and think of when some of them were. And just to help you out, what he does in the footnote is just looking across 1 century. He shows how many revolutions in how many different places there were. So suddenly this idea that these things are rare and enormously significant and for one time only, start to see how many there are in France, or how in China the revolutions against the Ming dynasty happened several times, and our idea of revolution suddenly shifts, and well, maybe we haven't got the right idea. So, again, as we go forward, as we come upon technologies, all of which people will have said, and we'll talk about this next time, this is a revolutionary technology, ask yourself a little what kind of revolution people have in mind. And ask yourself how significant it is if the last 3 technologies were also called revolutionary technologies. And every damn technology that appears is then called a revolutionary technology. Is it significant? And if not, then where are we going to place our ideas of significance? One, just to bring up in the last 10 minutes or so, is because it's one that kind of involves you, is this idea of generational change. And that you get a new generation, and that this generation is profoundly different from every generation that has come before. Because, well, perhaps because of the technology. So, the digital generation. This idea of generation gap has been around for a long time, came up in lipstick advertisements, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take it seriously. But again, the question is, when does the break come? The break, probably most of you would want to say, comes between you and me. I'm far too old to be part of the digital generation, but you guys, born digital. And you can see these claims go back. Nicholas Negroponte talked about it back in the 1990s. John Markoff in the New York Times in 93. Today's students, digital native, says, think and process information fundamentally differently. That's why you can't understand a word I say. And it runs much deeper than most educators would like to have it. And so we get this idea that things are really changing, that there is, the children of cyberspace now start to say that people in their 20s, examine your own passport and birth certificate, are really not even part of the generation because of the ever-accelerating pace of change. Things are changing so fast that we will not be able to understand the next generation if this idea of revolution as cutting one generation off from another is something that we have to bear in mind. Indeed, the idea was that, just as one generation was being told that it was the digital generation, and we could tell that from how much digital media it was used, M1 suddenly got pushed aside by the next generation, M2, who use far more stuff than you do, and you can't even understand them. So again, are we shifting again, and is this a shift of such profound change? The question that comes up is that when is the profound change? Because, of course, one thing that tends to happen is that each generation tends to think that it is radically different from the generation that came before. You tend to think, I'm sure, that you're very different from me. Generation Y tends to think that it's different from Generation X, that the difficulties they had to face has just made them entirely separable and different. As Generation X thought that it was from the baby boomers. Those people, they just don't understand. They lived in a world that was black and white, we can almost feel. And then it changes again if you go back to the children of the Depression, perhaps, where, what was their world? A world so different. Well, was it so different from the generation that came after them, or so different from the generation that came before? So if we have a notion of the digital generation being profoundly different, anyone suggest what that generation is? Do you feel you're all part of it? Not part of it? Because people are making all sorts of claims on your behalf about digital natives and the digital generation. And of course, saying to people like me, you'll never understand them, you'll never get across them, which is why nobody's answering my question at the moment, because I can't get through to you. Yes?
Well, I mean, I think it's all relative because for most of us here, being born, in the 90s, that's right, that's on, and so it kind of grew up with us in a little bit of a way, but at the same time, you don't really, your first 6 years of your life, you don't really remember much of it, just, having fun with it. So, yeah, we're much more digitally native than, anyone who's older than us at the same time. People who might be, younger siblings or, they are far more used to having technology the same way. You hear stories of, people now who are 3 or 4, and you pick up an iPad and start to grasp the concept of touching something other than that, or, moving a finger to, play a game or something like that.
And does that suggest that they're radically different from you?
Maybe, certainly not like biologically, but maybe the way that they think that when you start to have that experience.
So there is that sort of changing their mind, that the way they view the world, that and for all of you, in a way, if you get these very different technologies in the world into which you're born, you will see the world differently. The question is whether you then look back and say, but for most other people, well, life was pretty hunky-dory and went on. I guess we're running out of time, but if I get to your questions, if I can, I will. Take this chap, Henry Adams. Anybody know who Henry Adams was? Yes? Sorry, what's your name? Tim. Right, and so also grandson, therefore, of John Quincy Adams. His father was ambassador to the UK, and he grew up over there. He's a strange, slightly pompous guy. You always know someone's pompous when they write about themselves in the third person. And this is him, because he's actually talking about himself, only looking back at his own figure in 1854 and pondering on the needs of the 20th century. He wondered whether, on the whole, the boy of 1854, when he was born, stood nearer to the thought of 1904 or to that of the year 1. So, is he as close to primitive man, or is he? Because before the boy was 6 years old, he had seen 4 impossibilities made actual: the ocean steamer, the railway, the electric telegraph, and the daguerreotype, which is the photograph. And of course, by the time that he died, a little later than when he wrote this book, he had seen the telephone, he had seen the radio, he had seen the airplane, he had seen aerial warfare, he had had global war. So in his lifetime, that's a pretty serious bunch of changes to bring about. And he's saying that it is so significant that it actually makes him as different from someone before 1854 as he is different from someone who's born in the year 1. That this huge chasm opens when new technologies come in and change your life. Now, that's clearly, again, significant. The only question is, he's clearly not the first person to make that claim, because we're all making that claim one way or another. So then the question, the odd paradoxical question becomes, is the generation that is really different from the generation that came before the generation that doesn't claim to be really different from the generation that came before? Because everybody else has that in common, is that we all think we're really different. So one thing to bear in mind then is that's part of why we do history, because we want to be able to look back and see whether we can tell the difference and the commonalities. So for this, Rudyard Kipling, writing more now about national identity than historical identity, has this odd phrase: what should they know of England who only England know? He was so fed up with people saying England is the greatest country in the world, we're the most liberal, we're the most democratic, we're the most whatever. And he said, and he'd been grown up most of his life in India, he said, how do you know? You've never been outside the country. You don't know what anything else looks like. So again, if we want to claim to be part of a radically different generation of the information age, or for you, the digital generation, you can't really make that claim unless you start to do a little digging, and that's part of the purpose of this course. Equally, and I will explain the game of cricket to you at another time, in this wonderful, great film which has a scene of cricket being played in it, that L.P. Hartley says in the go-between, the past is another country. And indeed, this is one thing we have to remember. We're looking across very different cultures. The past can at times seem the same to us, and it can seem as different as another country. Equally, we want to go and look at other countries and say, how did they look at this particular period? Or how did they adapt to this particular technology? So that's something that we want to do. As we talked about with this sense of the information age, there's one way in which we can look and say, well, really, every organism lives in an age of information. But you actually also want to say, but how did they think about it? How did they see the world? So another thing that we shall try to do in the course of this is to follow Young's argument that the real central theme of history is not what happened, and we'll try to talk about some of that, but what people felt about it when it was happening. How did they see it, rather than how did we presume that they saw it? Just to get very quickly to our ideas of what people thought and felt, this was something that the BBC did in 2005, asking people to submit suggestions, and then these were vetted, and a final list of 10 was put up. What were the most significant technologies since 1800? It was passed around various ways. In fact, it's more or less a global survey because it was done through their website. If you look at Wired, its top technologies, they kind of look significant. Anybody want to guess what the top technology that came out for the BBC quiz was? Because this might just tell you something about the Brits. But I think it was a more global survey than that. 2005, the top technology, by a significant majority. Anyone willing to have a punt on that? Sorry? Cell phone. Okay, that's a good guess. That would be reasonable. Spreading around. Yes? Sorry? Television. Okay, Wired would be with you on that. Yeah? The computer? All right, well, this really will tell you how backdated the Brits are. By nearly 60%. People thought actually the bicycle. And it's not a bad way to think about things. Maybe in the way that society has been transformed over 200 years. If, for instance, although it's clearly changing radically now, if you look at something like Chinese society, hugely significant technology. It's a growing technology in the way. It's an interesting answer. I'm not going to say it's the right one, but it's interesting. So the other things, come way down compared to that. I'm afraid sadly the cell phone didn't even make it onto the... So what I've just tried to do in going up these steps is to say, look, these are questions that as we go over time, we're going to have starting to consider. So we don't just say, well, this is an age of X and this is an age of Y and a revolution caused it and that revolution was caused by technology. We'll try to think in a little more complex ways. The way to begin that, then, is the assignment, which is due on Sunday. If anyone wants to submit it on Friday, it'll be more than welcome. So the reading, which is both online by, one is in the reader, the Raymond Williams is in the reader, fairly old essays, but people looking at this question of what's called technological determinism. Heilbronner, with a very famous paper, which was quite often republished and then made the subject of a later book, is do machines make history? Is it technology that really drives history? And Williams, in a more complex argument, is trying to say, what's the relationship between technology and society? So we want you to read both. The Heilbronner is short, only about 10 pages. The Williams is about 20, 22, I think. Read those and answer this question, or these questions, in a couple of paragraphs. Heilbronner and Williams describe the relationship of technology and society in different ways, okay? So who has the better argument? Who would you go with, Heilbronner or Williams? And why? Give some reasons. Don't just say why. They both wrote before the current age of information. Each discusses technologies that are with us today. So they're talking about recognizable technologies. Heilbronner writes briefly of the computer. Williams writes at length about television. What sort of predictions about contemporary technology does each make, and do these predictions hold up? So that is in some way how you can answer the earlier question, by looking at what they predict will happen with technology and say who's got it right, therefore does that shore up their argument. Any questions about that? Before you leave, make absolutely sure you're on the sign-up sheet. It will be critical if you want to stay with the course. Thanks very much. This is Stuart the Weekend. We see you on Tuesday.